Well, this is pretty shocking. President Biden has announced that he wants to build more wall pieces, or at least try to complete more wall pieces along the US-Mexican border. Now, here's why this is a little shocking and a strange turn of events. First off, President Biden was highly against having any sort of wall or barrier between Mexico and the United States. But second off, we just deployed a rapid deployment of active duty soldiers on the Mexican border. So what's the goal? What's the end game? Are we wasting everyone's time, or are we actually completing our objectives as a country and as a military? Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that massive amounts of the wall and border sections are missing, to where migrants can quite literally just walk straight into the country. Now, around 2016, 2017, President Trump said we're going to build a wall. We all know this, but more important, we're going to deploy soldiers, active duty soldiers, to the border. Now, this mission has been quite a drag for the U.S. military, especially the Army and some components of the Marines. But essentially, what the mission for soldiers out at the border is that you are guarding portions of the Mexico-U.S. border that has no wall. So wherever there's no wall, you'll typically have soldiers. But again, a lot of these soldiers have their hands tied behind their backs. They can't really do too much unless they are being threatened or attacked. Other than that, they just call right into Border Patrol or the state troopers, and they will take care of migrants crossing the border. Other than that, the U.S. military, Army, Marines, etc., they're just there chilling, hanging out, and just waiting for orders. Now, don't take this as me demeaning the U.S. military or the Army. I'm speaking from some experience here, where a lot of my former soldiers went from Afghanistan straight to the Mexican border within a year. And they will all tell you, and a lot of people on this mission, especially within Texas, we're not doing much. We're just sort of hanging out, we're calling in whatever we see, and we're not necessarily even trained to do this. We're technically trained to fight the foreign enemies of the United States. And speaking of foreign enemies of the United States or the Biden administration is starting to realize a lot of this influx of migrants coming into the United States with ease happens to be because of cartel members or gangs who are showing or educating and bringing in migrants straight into the country. And unfortunately, mixed in with a lot of these people are actual cartel members. So technically, these are enemies of the United States. So it looks like we might need some U.S. soldiers on the border. Now, something else I thought I might add is that there's a bit of hypocrisy coming from the Biden administration as far as protecting our borders. And I'm talking about Texas, because Texas is the first state to sort of implement their own wall or borders, if you will, with a floating buoy barrier that has not been as effective as they want it to be, but nonetheless, they are still trying to implement some tactics to stop migrants from coming into the United States. But migrants are smart. Again, with the help, with the cartel and education, they understand as long as we just go around the wall or open portions of the wall, the United States is not going to do anything else. There's really no law stopping migrants from coming in, because once migrants come in, they're just released. Okay, so here's an article from Reuters. In reversal, Biden to build more U.S. border wall, Trump demands an apology. Because, of course, again, Trump was the first one to fully come out and say, we're going to build a wall. And not only that, we're going to send the troops, because a lot of troops were in charge of actually defending portions of the original wall, or really the border. President Joe Biden's administration said on Thursday it will add sections to a border wall to stave off record migrant crossings from Mexico, a reversal that embraces a signature policy of former President Donald Trump. Something else that's interesting, one of Biden's first actions after taking office in January of 2021 was to issue a proclamation pledging that no more American taxpayer dollars be derivated to construct a border wall, as well as a review of all resources that have already been committed. But nonetheless, while taxpayer money was not going to the wall, taxpayer money was sort of going to a human wall. The U.S. military, who's out there day and night protecting our borders, but only doing what they can do, which is not a lot. Something else we need to understand is that this migration issue is a very complex and difficult issue to navigate, because we also have something called the Darien Gap, which is the natural jungle, or their own version of a natural wall border between Panama and Colombia. Within the Darien Gap, you have migrants, cartel members who are crossing the gap into North American regions, coming in from Panama into Mexico. And down here is where a lot of criminal activity is facilitated, And out here is where a lot of the migrants, before they come into the United States, they're crossing the Darien Gap. So understand this, a lot of migrants are coming straight to the United States with no preventative measures because they're sort of protected themselves by this natural barrier and resource. Now, as far as the U.S. military wasting their time or actually serving a purpose on the border, I do think they're somewhat serving a purpose on the border. But nonetheless, the main enemy or opponent objective of the United States is, of course, going to be the cartel. Because there is an understanding that, look, our country is made up of immigrants, and a lot of people trying to come into the country, they're here for a better life. The unfortunate circumstances, though, is that Mexico is just harboring cartel members, and the United States has even spoken about potentially going to battle, combat, or war with the cartel. So the U.S. military is almost in a preemptive position in case they do need to defend the country. But nonetheless, I think the U.S. military is not necessarily wasting their time too much because there is a direct enemy right across the border of the United States, and it's always good to have some sort of protection or troops along your borders.
The administration is pushing through a plan to add to a border wall in southern Texas due to a surge in illegal crossings. The White House is waiving more than 24 federal laws to do so.
Clay, well, the White House is pushing back on the idea that this building of 17 miles of border wall in South Texas is being done because of pressure from even Republicans and even members of the president's own party.
Now, I find this incredibly hard to believe that the Biden administration is facing no pressure whatsoever. You just deployed all these troops to the border. You have Texas, who has a mass amount of deployments out there. They're not able to do anything. I think that the administration was hoping that with the influx of U.S. military resources and soldiers and their professionalism, they were going to be able to stop the migrants, but these migrants could care less. Now, is a wall going to solve the issue? Probably not, because this is only 17 miles of wall. Nonetheless, for sure there was issues. Texas has been saying, you guys don't understand. We're facing 10,000 people a day, and as soon as they enter the country, they get to go straight into the country because we have no reforms to turn them away. So this is essentially what's happening. You have more and more soldiers going to the border. You have President Biden who says, you know what, we should be building a wall. Nonetheless, I do think it's only going to escalate. The more and more that wall closes and the more and more soldiers show up, more migrants are going to show up because they're finding out this is going to be one of their last opportunities to potentially get into the United States. And again, this is a very sad situation, but it's also a bad situation for everyone involved. Migrants are trying to find a better life. You have cartel members who are bypassing the U.S. military. In my opinion, I think the U.S. military, you need to give them more responsibilities. You need to give them a little more power, because if you know that the border, I'm not trying to turn this into like a communist state, but if we know that we have troops who are armed and ready to engage and actually ready to take the fight to the cartel on the border, I think the situation would be a little more different. I think it'd be a little more tame, but everybody needs to come together and actually fight together. And when I say fight, I mean in a peaceful way. We don't need to use violence on everyone, but if the cartel is going to keep pushing and pushing whatever they need to push into the United States, we need to do something about it besides just building a wall.